Pleased to have been asked to chair this debate. I'm Sam Gurney. I'm the Regional Secretary of the TUC region which covers London, the East and South East, now known as TUC LESE, formerly known as TUC. We cover quite a big chunk of the country and have been long-standing supporters of Levellers Day under my brilliant predecessor, Megan, who is taking a photograph now, and will be doing roving mic duties when we get to questions. But as you all know, the day goes back to the time when Tony Benn first spoke here in the late 1970s. The theme of today's debate, Confronting Poverty and Injustice, is sadly all too urgent still in today's world, both nationally and internationally. It's in the DNA of the trade union movement, but apparently perhaps not so much in the DNA of some of the current leadership of the political party which we founded. I suspect we may come back to that in questions during the debate. As I said, we've got three fantastic speakers. I have to admit to getting slight imposter syndrome when I was looking at the biographies I was sent through. I will give you a little bit more information about each of them as they're invited to speak. We've asked them all to do 10 to 12 minutes to open the discussion. Then we'll open it up for comments and questions from the floor. If people could try and be as succinct as possible when we get to that stage so we can get the maximum number of people in. Don't have to be ultra concise, but we're not looking for extra speeches. So yeah, when you make your points, please do come in and try to be concise on that. As I said, Megan's got a roving mic, so if you can wait for that to get you. I'll be taking contributions in groups of 3 or 4, and we are going to conclude at 4:30 at the latest. So, without further ado, our first speaker is Sarah Woolley. Sarah is General Secretary of the Bakers, Food and Allied Workers Union, representing workers in the baking and food sector. The union was established in 1847, which admittedly I did not know until I read my notes. Sarah was a shop steward at a company which then became Greggs, didn't it? I think it started before it became Greggs. Was elected to the union's National Executive Committee and then became a full-time officer. She was elected as General Secretary back in 2020, the first woman to hold the post of BAFU General Secretary. She was re-elected in January this year. And as well as her work as GS, Sarah has been leading work in the wider movement to support our organising and rebuilding. So the work with Organise Now and Strike Map, which are fantastic, and if you don't know about them, would definitely advise you to have a look at those. So it's an enormous pleasure to welcome Sarah to speak to us. Over to you.
Thank you ever so much. It's a real honour to be with you today at Levellers Day, not just to enjoy the music and how good was the band at the beginning and the atmosphere, but to stand where memory becomes a movement. Because it's not just a place and a day to remember our history, to remember those before us and to celebrate. But it's also a call to action, isn't it? A reminder that the fight for injustice, the fight for justice is never over, that poverty is definitely political, that injustice, I put my teeth back in, I promise, that injustice is structural and that history, and we've got a responsibility to ensure that history doesn't keep repeating itself. And we gather here in the spirit of the Levellers, those brave visionary souls of 1649, who dare to imagine a world where power serves the people, not the powerful. They challenged tyranny, championed democracy and paid the price for believing that all lives should count the same. Centuries later, and we still face different versions of the same injustice, don't we? People going hungry in one of the richest countries on earth, families working 2, 3 or even more jobs and still not making ends meet. Communities hollowed out by austerity, demonised by the press, neglected by those in Westminster and shamefully the current government too, who've forgotten what public service means. But we've not forgotten. That's why we're all here today, and we absolutely won't stand by. The Bakers, Food and Allied Workers Union has shown what standing up looks like. We've always been a campaigning union, and if you've not bought Dave's book, make sure you do, because there's a chapter in there about it. Our Right to Food campaign that we launched a few years ago isn't just about meals and being able to afford food. It's about dignity. It's about the basic truth that no one should go hungry in a land of plenty. It's about recognising food poverty as an issue of justice and not charity. And the Food and Work network that we've created off the back of that has been clear. We cannot tackle hunger without tackling the exploitative, low-paid work that so often causes it. You can't separate poverty from precarity or hunger from housing. The fight for food is the fight for fair pay, decent conditions and respect. And they're not separate struggles. They're threads of the same fabric, and they're not going to be solved by the people who created them, because it's certainly not our members and our communities that have done that. Because whilst we're told to tighten our belts, and I probably won't do 10 to 12 minutes, to be fair, because whilst we're told to tighten our belts, those at the top, as we can see, hoard wealth built off the backs of our labour. Well, let me be absolutely clear. We've got more in common with each other, in this room, in our communities, than we will ever have with those that serve in Westminster. Because the real divide in this country is top versus bottom. It's not us versus them. It's not the migrants that are coming over. It's not the people that don't look and sound like us. It's the people at the top that are exploiting us. And that's the divide that is clear for us all to see. And when we come together, when we organise, when we strike, when we act in solidarity, when we attend events like this today, that's when change becomes possible, because that's when the power shifts back into our hands. And trade unions have always known this. We definitely have, as the oldest trade union in the country, despite what RMT try and tell people. We don't wait to be rescued, because we know that nobody's going to do it for us. We have to do it ourselves. We fight for each other. You know, I'm proud of wearing my Birmingham Bin Strikers t-shirt today, despite them not being DFAW members, because it doesn't matter. We're one movement, and we should be supporting everybody throughout it. We speak out even when it's uncomfortable, and sometimes we stood there on our own doing so, and we push back. And we say quite loudly, don't we, that you will not divide us, you will not silence us, and you will not keep us down. Because that's what a movement is all about. History is not something that we observe, it is something that we make. We are here, we've made history today by attending this event. The levellers of 1649 stood against a system that told them they had no right to speak. And we now stand against a system that tells us we have no right to live with dignity. It's quite shameful, isn't it, in 2025, in one of the richest countries in the world. So let's learn from the levellers, not just in spirit, but in strategy. We have to build community when they sow division. We've seen the rise of reform. We've seen what they're doing to communities that already are still, living through the decimation of the Thatcher years. We've got to demand that food, housing and work are rights, not privileges. They should never just be for the few that can afford decent, nutritious food. Everybody should have access to that. Let's reject the politics of fear and choose politics of solidarity, and make sure that we are communicating that and talking to people about why standing collectively matters, why listening to the kind of the little shards of what reform telling them and not the full picture. Because we are the many, aren't we? And they are the few. And that gets bandied around a lot, but actually it's right. We are the many, our class is the many. So yes, let's remember the past, but we also have to raise our voice for the future. We've got to organise, we've got to educate, we've got to agitate again. If you're in this room, and I don't know that there is anybody that wouldn't be in this room that isn't part of a trade union, but please go away and join one, get your family to join one, your neighbours, your friends, your kids, their mates at school, because we all need to be in a union. Back the picket line, strike back. If you've not been on it, you can go on there and find out where your local picket line is, so you've no excuse anymore not to go down. Challenge poverty, confront injustice. Don't wait for permission to do any of that, because it's a responsibility on all of our shoulders to make sure that the people that follow us have got a better life than we're currently going through. And as the levellers taught us, power never concedes anything without a fight. So we need to be that fight to make sure that our kids, our grandkids and future generations don't have to struggle to survive. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. We'll come back to questions at the end of our three speakers. So our second speaker is Danny Dorling. Danny is the 1971 Professor of Geography. And I did ask him if there was an exciting story behind why it's 1971. There isn't. It's about the funding. 1971 Professor of Geography, attached to St Peter's College at Oxford University. He's the author of numerous works on the wealth gap, Equality and Inequality in Britain. And believe me, if you look at your Wikipedia entry, you'll see just how numerous those works are. It is a very impressive list of works. Danny has described Britain as more unequal now than in Dickens' time, and said, but thankfully he's known for his ability to express his academic work in very accessible terms. Danny, you are very welcome.
Thank you so much. Yes, very sadly, I've made a career about writing about misery. I never meant to. I was interested in drawing computer maps because computers that could do visualization and fancy 3D graphics were new in the 1970s and 1980s. And I decided it would be interesting to draw pictures of people. And then I carried on doing that. I did it mainly for Britain. And every 5 years, every decade, the pictures that we drew with the new data showed a country becoming more divided than the period before. Which is why I felt this obligation to keep on updating it and looking. I'm going to tell you a bit about statistics, but the good news is I've got no notes. So I'm not going to be giving you reams of numbers. But it's part of the struggle. It's maybe the most boring part of the struggle, but part of the struggle is to get information and to get numbers out there. I used to belong to a group which is still going, called Radical Statistics for Radical Statisticians. And yes, exactly. But, you know, the fact that radical statistics can keep going should give you hope if you worry about movements existing. One thing that the radical statisticians did is pressurise government to release information that allowed us to actually know where we're living. It wasn't just them, it was sociologist Peter Townsend in particular argued that we didn't have good enough statistics on child poverty. And so by the 1990s we began to get very, very detailed statistics. These are released every year, around about the third week of March. So if you're wondering why are there stories that time of year, why is the Child Poverty Action Group, why is Save the Children saying it's terrible, it's because only once a year are the numbers released. We could do this every month if we cared. We care about things like GDP, so we revise that at least quarterly. But anyway, every year the numbers came out, and I've looked at the latest numbers, and I thought about this county. It's been a lovely day. It's perfect weather. If you don't like it too hot, this is just right for me. And we've marched around one of the most picturesque villages in England, one of the richest villages, in one of the richest counties, in what repeatedly you'll hear is the fifth richest country on earth. And you probably noticed the very, very expensive cars having to wait until we marched past, and that was enjoyable. And you will have seen, you know, the picture postcard cottages and wondered who on earth can afford to live here. Because wealth is out there in your face, right? Riches are easy to spot. The private school, I think, that was housing people just above where we were listening to wonderful music. I thought that would be good for the kids. You know, you can see their properties because they're large. What you don't see in Burford is the poverty in Burford because it's hidden. People are ashamed of the situations that they're living in. But of course there's poverty in this little village and all around. Which brings me to the statistics which came out just a few weeks ago. The House of Commons Library very kindly analysed them, and for every parliamentary constituency in the country has released how many children are living in the worst states of poverty. This is actually, you're glad I haven't got notes because I would go endlessly into it. This is before housing costs are considered, right? There is abject poverty for at the least 1 in 10 children in Oxfordshire, and at the most heading towards 1 in 3, before you even consider the rents that their parents have to pay. In the last 5 years, the number of children who are poor, living in families with less than 60% of the middle family, has gone up by 3,000 in this county. It dipped slightly a few months into the pandemic when that extra £20 a week was given. That extra £20 a week meant that poverty fell everywhere in Oxfordshire, because there are enough children in families in Oxfordshire for whom £20 a week tips them just from one side of a line to another. It's a tiny amount of money. In every constituency, there are now 7 in this county, in every constituency in the county, child poverty has risen. It's risen by an extra 1 or 2 children in every 100 in the most rich constituencies of the county. The rise in child poverty in Oxfordshire, in absolute terms, has been higher in the 5 most affluent constituencies than in Oxford East or Banbury. So, although poverty may be concentrated in the poorest estates and the poorest parts of our larger cities, the actual number of new children experiencing what it is like to be this poor is happening out in places like this. This is where it's occurring. This is where people are going hungry 3 or 4 times a month. A majority of children who have a brother and sister, because of the benefit cap, are now going hungry. That statistic comes from Torsten Bell. And I do sometimes feel if you may be the right audience, you remember Torsten trying to explain he has to pay his mortgage, and he's the MP for Swansea, and he used to run the Revolution Foundation, and he's probably on a quick learning curve of the difference between producing reports and statistics and the lives of his constituents in Swansea. I hope he does go on some Fridays. He was ridiculed in the press when he explained that he needed to be paid a lot because he has to pay his mortgage. But that statement kind of highlighted the fear we live with, that even a member of Parliament doesn't think that they have enough to get by. However, in that House of Commons report that came out a few weeks ago, there was good news. There were 12 constituencies in Britain, in the UK, 12 where child poverty had fallen in the last 10 years. And we're very bad at looking at good news. The interesting thing about those 12 is they were all, without exception, in Scotland. Scotland now has the lowest rate of child poverty in Britain. A child is less likely to be poor in Scotland than in the southeast of England. Things change. Things can get better. It's not that Scotland is wonderful. It's that the Scottish government, led by the Scottish National Party, in quiet agreement after much debate and angst with the Labour Party in Scotland, have agreed that child poverty is intolerable, that the government will make payments to every family with children in receipts of benefits, and began to do this during the pandemic. It started off being only £10 a week for children under 6, if you received any form of welfare, any form of universal credit, untapered. You don't lose it because you get something else. The campaign is now to rise it to £30 a week for every child under 16. It's around about £28 a week for every child under 16. For a family of 3 in Scotland, in those 2 out of 7 families which are poor, that's an extra £4,000 a year. That means that no child need go cold or hungry in Scotland now. You don't have to look to the best organised countries in Europe to say what might be possible. It's occurring within the United Kingdom. And I'll keep repeating this until he tries to sue me. But Gordon Brown opposed this and wrote that it wouldn't work, it wasn't efficient, in the Scotsman. And his party told him to shut up. I assume that's why he shut up. And why the Scottish Labour Party works with the Scottish National Party to at least do this. There are many other groups who are not helped. The elderly who are poor are not helped. People with disabilities are not getting extra help in Scotland. There are some controls on landlords, there are other things happening. But Scotland only has limited devolved powers, but it's using them to show what is possible. Take you out an upper level. These are just the statistics for the UK. For the rich world, it is the United Nations which produces the poverty statistics for children. And in their latest report, and what is often ignored, in a 7-year period around about 2022, child poverty fell in about 2/3 of the affluent countries that they were surveying. It fell. In some cases, it fell by as much as 30% because of policies of governments in those countries. More often, it fell by 20 or by just 10%. But child poverty is falling in most of the rich countries of the world. The poorer countries are measured in different ways, and that is a story which I will not fit in my 10 minutes. We don't notice this because we don't talk about it, but it is absolutely possible for things to get better. At the other extreme of that league table, it's a table of about 30 countries where they can measure it, poverty being less than 60% of the median income. There are 4 countries, I think they include Switzerland and Iceland, where child poverty has risen by 10%, but those were the countries where the rate was lowest. So that rises on a small number. And at the very top, the country which has the worst record in the world for change in child poverty was the United Kingdom. So we are the absolute extreme. When people tell you that there are many kinds of inequalities and lots of things we've got to consider, they are right, but one kind matters above all else, and it is money. And you will know this if you've never had money for a significant period of your life. The importance of the freedom of having money. And we have to explain again and again that this matters. We now measure it, we know. We can debate later what it is about Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer that means they cannot see this. You hope it is because they cannot see this. The situation here is bad. The situation in Burford is bad. The situation in Oxfordshire is bad. But the situation is getting better in Scotland, and it is getting much better in many parts of Europe right now. Because people campaign to make things better than they are, we don't talk about the successes. But if you are not aware that it is possible right now to make things better, it is much harder to campaign for it. And once you are aware that this is being done, including within the United Kingdom, it is much easier to say it is absolutely intolerable that our elected members of Parliament are not acting because they cannot tell us that they could not act. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Danny. I'm sure we will come back to many of those points. It's a sobering but vital reminder about where we can campaign and where there is a political will. Change is absolutely possible. And now, last but definitely not least on our panel, the Reverend Canon Professor Mark Chapman. Mark retired as a priest last year but holds a number of academic positions, including as a visiting professor at Oxford Brookes University. He's better known to all of us for his thoughtful and inclusive addresses on many past Levellers' Day and this morning, which I'm sure most of you were here for in the commemoration of the churchyard. But Mark, it's great to have you with us on this platform, so we've got more time to hear from you and also to join in the debate. So over to you, Mark.
Well, thank you very much indeed, and it's great to be here with you. And I realise I've been coming for about 40 years. There's probably people who've been coming for longer, but I've been coming nearly every year for about 40 years, and have done the dedication for about the last 25 or something like that. I could explain why I ended up doing it, but I won't. And my career has been as a church historian, and so one of the things I've always tried to think about is what's the relationship between the past and the present, and indeed the future. what has it got to do with the fact that 3 soldiers were shot in the churchyard here? What's that got to do with the present day? Well, if one thinks about it, if we're talking about poverty and injustice, those are 2 things that are obviously just as prevalent, even more prevalent in the 17th century than they are today. But still, obviously, as we've heard, we're living in probably the most unequal society in Europe, and the poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer almost across the country. And we've got a party in Parliament, in government, which historically proclaimed the solidarity of international labour, but now scandalously is demonising immigrants and refugees. And the vision of radical equality and redistribution, that was at the heart of what the Levellers wanted to do. That message continues to go unheard by so many. And so sometimes all we can do is just to despair, especially when it seems the whole political system is floundering. What do people do? They vote for charlatans and for self-serving buffoons in the vain hope that things will get better. Now, I'm not a politician, I'm not a statistician either. I'm simply a historian and a preacher. And I think there's one little bit of the vision of the Levellers that is crucial as we think about equality. They were participating at the time in a very bloody civil war that was fought in part over religion. And almost everybody on both sides of that war thought that the winner should be able to impose their beliefs on everybody else. They should enforce church discipline and all that. And that's where I think the Levellers are important. They were a radical group of disaffected soldiers who had a completely novel idea of the absolute rights of everybody before the law, and that the state should not be able to tell people what to do or what to think. The freedom of religion, the freedom of thought, was something that just simply hadn't been there before. It was a radical new idea. What happened was something like this. The Levellers emerge in the army. It's a period of military rule, but it's also a time when the old established order is breaking down. Bishops have been abolished, but the alternative, Presbyterianism, can't be imposed. Cromwell himself was what we would now call a Congregationalist. It was a little bit of that in the film, but a bit like Tony Benn's mother, incidentally, converted to Congregationalism because she hated the Church of England so much for not ordaining women at the time. But Cromwell obviously had a very different idea about how the church and the world should be structured. But the church, he felt, should continue, the state should continue taking the taxes to pay for the church. There's immense religious competition at this time. And for the first time, because of all that competition, they simply couldn't impose uniformity from the centre. And that's why, in many ways, groups started thinking, well, maybe we should just have a separation of church from state. Maybe we should abolish the tithe, the land taxes that pay for that church. So for the Levellers, it was really very simple. The state is answerable, not to the wealthy, not to the ruling classes, but to the people. And it had no will of its own to impose on those people either. Religion, thought, everything was a matter of free choice. And that really was a very radical idea indeed, and completely different from most of the other groups of the time. They just wanted to impose their own version of religion. And because if you think about it at the moment, we've got people telling us what it should be to be English, what we're supposed to do to be English. We're supposed to learn English and integrate into some kind of fanciful vision of Britishness or something like that. And who's telling us it? It's a Labour government telling us this. What was really novel about the Levellers was the reservation of certain human rights from the power of even the people's representatives to infringe them. It's a radical thing indeed. So they may have failed at the time, and they did fail at the time. The tactics backfired. But the novelty of what they were saying wasn't lost, even to their opponents. So freedom of thought is something that we gain really from that period, and especially from the Levellers. So even Puritans like Henry Ireton, they killed the king, but they still feel it's the right of the civil magistrate, the rulers, to impose uniformity of belief and conduct on all the people. But the Levellers don't think that. They want what we would now call secular solutions to the country's problems. And religion is simply a matter for people's consciences. People should simply be free to belong and to practice whatever they want within the constraints of a system of rights that the people themselves have created. So religion has to be free from the state, and all people can choose things for themselves. No longer are they then to live in a state of servitude, but they can govern themselves. And that meant nobody can take away their hard-earned freedom. Governments try to take away hard-earned freedoms. In 1662, they try and impose a prayer book. They try and impose a way of believing. Things gradually then begin to change, and gradually freedom of thought, freedom of speech begin to emerge. But they're constantly under threat, and we need to be on guard lest things are taken away. Those hard-won liberties are taken away. Those of us who lived through the 1980s saw one liberty after another being taken away. So the Levellers campaigned against dictatorship, and they inaugurated a series of reforms that really set off the modern world. And now we're experiencing a form of unconstrained power which threatens those very freedoms, and which is returning us in many ways to the kind of tyranny of having those people deciding on what the truth should be for us, and who subjugate the poor, and who silence their voice, and who suppress dissent. It's not just in America that's happening, it's happening on this side of the Atlantic. Our world is controlled by an oligarchy of the rich, where popular sovereignty is often little more than a sham. But we should remember it was freedom of religion that led to the changes that ultimately led to the enfranchisement of everybody, of the poor. It might once again be reflection on the freedom of belief, the freedom of the right to associate, that will lead to a far more complex set of political negotiations, rather than the sort of shoddy centralism that we see in today's Westminster politics. Who are they to tell us what to think? And over the years, we've seen by kind of stealth and deceit, there's been a steady removal of so much that we took for granted. We used to have public ownership. The people used to own water, transport. People used to control education. All of those things, gradually, one by one, they've been taken away. The poorest he no longer has quite the same as the greatest he. 50 years ago, they did. So, to this naive priest, what do we need? We need the popular control of monopolies, we need radical redistribution, we need proper taxes on earned and unearned income and property, we need decent funding for health and education. And all those simple ideas, I think, are at the heart of the Christian message. You know, I've come here as a priest, I'm a Christian. What we say every day at evening prayer is a radical hymn of the poor, to the poor. He hath showed strength with his arm, he scattered the proud in the imagination of their hearts. He hath put down the mighty from their seat, and hath exalted the humble and meek. He hath filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he hath sent away empty. That's the revolutionary song of Mary, and that's the song that can still inspire, whether you're a Christian or not. That really is the Christian theology of taxation. Now, the Magnificat, the Song of Mary, also used to be the song of socialists, of real socialists who didn't exercise fiscal restraint or cut disability and aid budgets, but who wanted to liberate the poor, free them from the tyranny of the rich. That's the song, I think, that needs to be sung again, and we need to scatter the proud in the imagination of the hearts, even when they're driving Porsches. Thank you.
Right, thank you everyone, and everyone was incredibly disciplined on your interventions then, so we've got lots of time, we have plenty of time for questions and points, so I'm going to look out. I've got one colleague right at the back there, but Megan, just...
I'll get my steps in.
I'm not from Oxfordshire, I'm from Buckinghamshire. But I manage the food bank in Aylesbury. So I've got a very good handle on the extent of poverty. And I agree with everything that everyone said, except one piece of terminology. Sarah, don't talk about food poverty. You're playing into the hands of the... Let's put it in a separate category and not mention it's poverty. Poverty is poverty, and it's due to lack of money. There's plenty of food there. The food waste in this country is horrific. But, so please call it insecurity. Sorry.
Thank you. And then just down here, Megan, middle row. If you want to put your hand up just so Megan can see. Yeah, And then two colleagues down here.
Yeah, my question's directed primarily at Sarah, but anybody can answer. I'm a veteran, I suppose, of struggles in the 70s for the unionisation of migrant workers, particularly in the hotel and catering industry. And I wanted to know what the unions are doing and what we can all do about the unionisation of migrants and refugees. I live in Coventry now, and obviously Amazon Warehouse is somewhere on our doorstep.
Excellent. And then two colleagues down here. And we'll take those and we'll come for a second round. So,
we talk about the winning of rights of expression in other levels. I'm thinking about 40 years ago when there was a determined effort by the then government to take away the right trade union rights, and the miners were the victims. I wonder what parallels you see with the current attempt to take rights away from the Birmingham bin strikers to a decent pay.
and making it easier for Megan, just next to you.
And mine's a question for Danny. You talked about the statistics about poverty generally. I wonder what statistics do we keep of children because of the sort of housing and rent act that we have now, who have to change schools because their parents cannot afford the rents that are put up and they have no way of having housing security.
Brilliant. So we'll take those four first. Danny, I'm going to come to you first on that point, because I think the others are mainly at Sarah. But if you want to comment on the other ones, please do.
Yeah, I'll just do that one. It's hard enough for me. You can get depressed about what you've lost. So I was a child in Oxfordshire, and when I was a child, if I start saying it, I started doing the accent. When I was a child in Oxfordshire, almost every child had security of tenure. Right? Your mum and dad were either buying a house or they had a council house, tiny number of housing associations. You couldn't be kicked out. I mean, unless you failed to pay the rent. But we also had near full employment. I'm quite old. And we forget we had that. It was never actually the aim. They weren't that evil. They were stupid. The changes in the 80s, the tenancy, was supposed to increase the number of professionals in private renting and students in private renting. They never thought it would become a dominant tenure of families and children. It's about 1 in 3 children in England now has a private landlord and can be evicted within 2 months. I've just done a book called 7 Children, where 3 of the 7 children are in this situation, and at the end of one chapter, their parents are facing the eviction notice. It is unbelievable, and it was partly cock-up, and then trying to get out of the situation. Furthermore, we used to have schools that were properly run, not by people doing it for charity. All our academy schools have trustees who very, very often don't send their own children to state schools, and they're doing it presumably to make themselves look good. And we have to start calling this out. We now expel far more children from schools than we did in the past, despite the fact that schools are so much safer now than they were in the past. There's much less violence in schools than there used to be. So you've got the chance of the school telling you they don't want you, but mum and dad, sometimes just mum, much more occasionally just dad, finding that they cannot stay, they have to move, and you've got to lose all your friends, right? And we put this in place, and it wasn't there. I was in Surrey recently at an event organised by trade unions, and the man who organised it told me that the reason he was organising it afterwards was that for the last 11 months he'd been living in a one room in a B&B. He was a trade union convener and working full-time for the council. His wife worked full-time for the council as a junior solicitor. They were not too badly paid, but it was Surrey. And they'd been evicted, and because they had a daughter aged 15, and if they hadn't had a daughter, they would have had it. Because they had a 15-year-old daughter, the three of them were put in a hotel bedroom for 11 months until a property could be found. And these are the most articulate of people, right? Things are falling apart in places like Oxfordshire and Surrey and Buckinghamshire in a way that we couldn't have imagined in the past. And we have to galvanise the understanding of this and talk about the stories and get over the shame and the humiliation of it. Because if we don't, the direction in which this anger is going to go is going to be very, very nasty.
Thank you, Danny. And so over to Sarah. So a point on language, I'm sure you will answer. Organising of migrant workers and union rights, especially in connection with the current dispute in Burford.
Just a few then.
Just a couple.
A short contribution. So I completely understand your point about poverty, but what we found talking to our members is if you talk to somebody and talk about poverty, it goes in two directions. It's either really overwhelming or they don't understand that they're actually living in poverty. So we break it down, we talk about food poverty, period poverty, energy poverty, because that's how we get our members to understand that they are living in poverty. You know, some of it is shame, some of it is the stigma attached to it, but actually, you're right, fundamentally, it is poverty. But getting people to kind of engage in conversations with us about their experiences, we break it down into sections. And it is also overwhelming when you're trying to tackle poverty. Where do you start? Because you can't cover everything all at once. So that's why I spoke specifically about food poverty in this contribution. In terms of what unions are doing around unionisations of migrants and refugees, you know, I'm so proud to be the General Secretary of a union that is so diverse. We have literally got members in our union from every country in the world, and I'm proud of that. Sometimes it's a little difficult with language barriers, but I am so proud of the fact that we have got such a diverse membership base. But we can't rest on our laurels, because we also know that there are millions of people coming in on visa schemes to pick fruit and work on farms that are kept out of the way of everybody behind barbed wire in caravans that nobody knows about because they're not near any kind of town or village, that are being exploited, that are being pushed further and further into debt, and then can't get on and are just left. And we're not able to access them as freely as we could access a group of workers in a hotel. So we're doing a lot of work as a union, as are others, with an organisation called Status Now that talks about migrant workers, undocumented workers, refugees, and they've just put together some demands that I'm going to work on with them around how we launch it, how we raise awareness of that. But if you've not heard of them, look on our website, you'll be able to find their demands there. And we've also got a new branch in our union called SALT, Solidarity Across Land Trades, and they are such a vibrant group of young people, predominantly young people, that work on the land, whether it is, you know, on a farm, whether it is fruit picking, whether it is landscape gardeners, and they've come together because they've recognised, certainly in that sector, how diverse the workforce is and how exploited they are, because the majority of migrant workers, because there are refugees in there. And they've just done a report, kind of a workers' inquiry of what working on the land is like, and some of the findings in that was, you know, disgusting. Never mind shocking, it was just purely disgusting. The richness of the landowners expecting people to work for free on these, you know, dodgy contracts because they give them somewhere to live. So why would they need money? So we are doing a lot, and I know the unions are doing a lot too. Are we doing enough? Probably not, no, if I'm being totally honest and totally critical. because we can never do enough. There's still not enough people in trade unions, is there? There's 24 million workers that we know of that are in the trade union movement, let alone all the people that are doing, underground work and uncontracted and cash in hand jobs. So we've still got a job of work to do. And then in terms of the parallels of the miners to today, in terms of the contracts and stuff, there's a lot of similarities. I've not been close enough to the Birmingham Bridge strikers' story to know all the fundamental details around it. I just support them because I know that they're going to be losing thousands of pounds, and when our members in a similar situation at a factory in Sheffield were going to lose thousands of pounds, Unite and others stood with our members too. Nobody can afford to lose that amount of money in the wages, especially when there's some people that both partners are working there. And I wasn't quite old enough to be in the miners' strike to know all the fundamentals of that. But what I can say is that it's a Labour government doing this to workers, key workers in a city, is nothing short of scandalous. We know that there's not an infinite amount of money apparently anywhere. But actually those people are key workers, and there were key workers in the pandemic doing the jobs that they do to put themselves at risk every day going out and collecting waste. They're key workers now, and they should be paid what they're worth. They should be treated with dignity and respect and paid what they're worth, regardless of what finances the local council may or may not have.
No. Thank you. Mark, have you got anything you'd like to add to any of those points?
Just one very quick thing. The last thing my grandfather said to me before he died is that he went and shop at Tesco's, Wooley, which is a slightly strange thing to say over the party year. And that's because he'd been a bricklayer for Westminster City Council for the whole of his life and his predecessors. And Shirley Porter was the person who owned it. She was the one who sold off so many, the gerrymandering scandal, if you remember, but selling off council houses, this large amount of council stock of good quality accommodation available at low rents. It gets sold off. Did they build more? No. The reason we have a housing crisis is all very straightforward. It's that criminal activity that happened in the 1980s in many ways. Many people benefited from it, and yet no new buildings were built. And that's the key thing that should have happened. Those profits should have all gone into new housing. It's a simple thing, but it didn't happen.
Thank you, Mark. I'll take the second round. I'm just going to slightly abuse the position of chair in a minute for a second to say, as an ex-GMB hotel and catering organiser, one of the most encouraging things in the region at the moment is seeing the work that unions are doing on organising migrant workers. So we have a huge priority at the moment on organising outsourced workers, and 6 of our main unions joined in that campaign together. And it's just made up the most vibrant, dynamic picket lines. And as you were saying in Coventry, although we just lost the recognition ballot, because for millions of pounds Amazon put into that campaign, the strength of organisation on the ground in Amazon, how Amazon tried to use ethnic lines to divide the workforce, but how the union has been fighting that and resisting that, is just incredibly encouraging to see. And our young members network in TUC LESE have decided to prioritise support for migrant worker organising going forward for this year. And it's good because it's out there, and any of you can join those picket lines for outsourced workers will know that kind of strength. So people who say they're difficult to organise, you're on those picket lines, you're going, these are not workers who don't want to be organised, don't want to be unionised, aren't prepared to fight for their rights when they're given the support to do so. So it's just really incumbent on all of us to kind of help those campaigns and support them. Right, that was abusing the chair, so I'm going to come. There was a colleague here in a purple wind cheater, and I'm going to come across. We're going to do this in front of that, then over to John.
This is for all of you, I suppose, but particularly Danny. It's to do with the rents being totally excessive, and as a result that keeps up house prices, I imagine. And I've asked various councillors over the years, what can you do about rents? Can you control them in any way? I know there's arguments against controlled rents, but I know how that goes. I still think the rents are vastly too high. As a result, we've mentioned the fact that children are living in properties where the rent is the main factor that stops them getting what they need to go to school, let alone what they would like to play with. What I wonder is the money. The whole thing has become a playground for investors. And it's so wrong that it needs a very radical change. So I'd love to know if anybody has views on that.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on one of the points that Mark was making. I guess there's many of us here today that if we weren't here, we would have been on the Palestine demonstration in London. And from what I'm hearing, that's one of the biggest Palestine demonstrations today that we've had for many, many months. And I think that's partly, but I think we should also have a think about this. You know, I worked on the campaign to free Julian Assange until he was actually free. And when I was working on that campaign for 5 years there, Julian Assange was the only political prisoner in this country. There are now 40 political prisoners in this country, about half of them just stop oil, and about half of them from the Palestine Solidarity movement, including the Filtered 18. It's been a long time since two leading members of huge social movements, Ben Jamal, the director of Palestine Solidarity, and Chris Nyman, the vice president of Stop the War, have been hauled in front of a court, as they will be on the 6th and 7th of July, for holding a perfectly peaceful legal demonstration. There are 11 other people, including 2 MPs, Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell, who have hanging over them similar charges by the Metropolitan Police. Now, this, in my mind, is a direct attack on freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. It's the lineal descent. The struggle to protect those rights is a lineal descent from the struggle that the Levelers were involved in, and it should remind us that whatever we campaign over, trade union rights or poverty, there is no more fundamental right than the right to stand in the street and say freely and openly what's wrong with the society.
From where I'm standing and thinking that the best way to sort out injustice and poverty in this country is a massive and rapid increase in trade union power. That's where I'm coming from, and the statistics aren't good. So the latest are that even in the public sector, there's a minority of workers now in a trade union, just slipped below 50%, 22% overall, 9% in the private sector, and 3% in I think it's the under 18s in a trade union. So we're going backwards. But if we were to get anywhere close to an increase in trade union power, and therefore to put the necessary pressure on any of the different groups of tossers that are likely to represent us in Parliament, that's just my personal take on that, is not just an increase in trade union membership, and we could certainly do with more trade union general secretaries like Sarah and like Ellie Dempsey in the RMT, but as trade union councils as well, the local trade union councils. So Sam, where I'm coming from as an organiser of trade union councils in the southwest, we've got 21 of them. We just set up a new one in Torbay. There's absolutely no reason why half a dozen trade union members in Burford wanted to set up a trade union council and get out and support Palestine and get out and support the bin strikers, and most of all from where I'm coming from, Sam, stand in that multi-millionaire's high street every month, giving out a simple leaflet saying, this is the TUC QR code on how to join a union, because you're much more likely to get young workers or workers of any age interested in joining a union, to be honest, by trades councils, because trade union recognition in the workplace is so hard to get. So if there is going to be a revival of trade union power, one key point are local trade union councils, organising communities, and Sam, with better support from the TUC, in some respects, which I won't go into. You know, that's where I'm coming from. Just a message of solidarity from 5 miles over the border, with the Southwest TUC. There's Cheltenham Trades Council here with their banner. There's Gloucester Trades Council here with a very, very young trade unionist. There's Bath Trades Council with their banner with 2 wonderful octogenarian or near octogenarian revolutionaries. And I'm from Bridgewater, which is the working class capital of the West Country, if anybody knows. And also Mendip Trades Council. So solidarity from the southwest to the southeast. Let's have working class power starting to creep up through increased power of local trade union councils. And I want to come back here sometime where there's a Burford Trade Union Council. That's what I want to see.
Making note with the glasses. That's right, no, with the glasses.
Thank you. Just like to start, this is not really a question, just to say that Rachel from Accounts is telling us lies. We have enough money in this country to do the work that needs doing. Now, I'm a follower of Professor Richard Murphy's blog, and he has written up that we could take this is just an example of what we can do. We could take the water back into public ownership, and it will cost the taxpayer nothing. Because we would pay, the government can create as many bonds as it needs. It can be 40-year bonds, and it can pay them off with bonds. And with any of this, with the fiat economy that we have, when the fiat economy is just a promise to pay, most of the national debt is money that's in circulation. If they can create as much money as they need to do the work that needs doing. Now, if there's any talk of inflation being caused, it's quite simple. They can solve that problem through taking money back out of the economy by taxing people. But who would they tax? They would tax the rich. And there are people here who know more about this, I'm sure, than I do. I'm just a retired agricultural engineer. But I just learned a few of these things having followed his blog. So I'd be interested to hear if anyone's got any more comments on that.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'm going to take responses to those, and we're going to take 4 more. I'm going to start at the end, Mark, if that's all right. And we'll come back to it.
The one thing about rent control, I know Germany very well, and I think something like 60% of people live in rented accommodation, and rents are controlled everywhere. Seriously controlled. It's just the way things are. I can't understand why that doesn't happen here. It used to happen. We used to have rent control. When was it abolished? In the 1980s? Again. So these things can happen, and they can happen very straightforwardly, if only there's the will to make it happen. We've got a Labour government. Is there the will?
I think what we should be doing is when we should be coming out in support of Ben and Chris when they're at court, the 6th and 7th of July. We should be out there in our masses, stood outside and supporting them. If Jeremy and John go through something similar, we should be there with them. We should be... I'm not the biggest fan of everybody travelling down to London, I have to say. I think we should be doing marches and rallies in every town and city across the country, across the UK, because there's marches and demos every week in London, and people become, immune to them almost, don't they? But I was in Wakefield last week for With Banners Held High, and there was 300-400 of us. There might have been more. It felt bigger. But we were having conversations about people in the street, about why we were there, what we were doing, what even a trade union is. And I think there's something to be said about, yes, we need the big demos. We need to come out, like today to Palestine, like in March when we came out in support of DPAC after the announcements we made about getting rid of benefits and changing everything. But we also need to be doing, and Dave's right, trades councils are a fundamental part of that, because they're the people that bring us together out there in our towns and our cities, that coordinate our May Day marches, our International Workers' Memorial Day events. Things like today don't happen just by bureaucratic trade union general secretaries thinking it might be a good idea. It's people on the ground doing it. And we've got to get to a point where we've trades councils in every town and city, and then we will be having events in every town and city. And then when something happens where somebody is, it's disgraceful, right? That again, we're in the country that we're in, and you can't stand down on the street and tell people that something's crap. I didn't swear. I tried not to swear then. But then when something like that happens, it's meaningful because we all descend on the capital. We all come out of our little towns and our villages and our cities, and we're saying we demand better, or we demand change. Plug there for you. But, you know, we've got a lot of work to do. That's why we got involved with Organise Now, to try and get that massive and rapid increase in trade union power. But the biggest reason people don't join a union is because they're not asked. Which is ridiculous when you think about it, isn't it? We talk about organising, we talk about building the union, but the main reason, it's not about money, it's not about cost, it's because they're just not asked. And I think there's a lot that people don't understand what we do, and that's why I spend a lot of time videoing things and live streaming and putting lots of stuff on social media, not to make me look like the busiest general secretary of the movement, but just to try and educate people. I've got friends that I went to school with that didn't join a union in their workplace because they've no intention of stopping, that'll talk to me about the work that I now do, and I've joined a union as a result. It's the biggest organising tool we've got, shouting about what we actually do, not what Reform and the Tories talk about what we do. And just to finish, because I'm waffling, nobody's ever just in anything. You weren't juster, you're not juster, you're an activist and you're here, as are we all. Don't ever kind of denounce yourself.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. And over to you, Danny. We've got rent control in particular, public ownership as well.
Okay. Only between 2% and 3% of people in this country are landlords. So if you're a landlord, you're not normal. And I do think this matters. And if lots of your friends are landlords, that means you're not very good at mixing. Because whenever we talk about rent control, particularly somebody like me, upper middle class, it's kind of the little secret of, we got together, me and her, and then, we just rented it out. We're accidental landlords, right? It is unacceptable to be in control of somebody else's home, right? And that, again, it's a way of saying it like it is unacceptable to be the trustee of an academy school. It should be seen as unacceptable and shameful to be taking part in the harm. And that helps as well. The private rented sector is the most inefficient sector. It's the most underoccupied. It's the one that's empty the most. It's partly why we have a housing problem, that we have so much private rented. We have single professionals renting flats that in the past a family of mum and dad and 2 kids lived in, but a single professional can pay more. It's the least efficient mechanism. It's the market mechanism. In this village, the ex-council houses, which are large-scale voluntary transfer to housing association, which are at the top of the hill, by the A40, by the noise, they're the ones which are full of kids and are densely packed. And that's not me giving away secrets, it's in the census, you can go and look. And in this village, a third of homes have 2 or more empty bedrooms. And it's the same almost everywhere, including London. We actually have more bedrooms per person than we've ever had. The reason for saying this is to go to your point. The policy since the 80s has been build 250 or 300,000 houses a year. Every government's promised it, different mixes of private or state, they've all failed on it. It's currently Angela Rayner's duty to deliver 250,000 a year. I went to a meeting in London this week and I learned something I didn't know. If we actually managed to build 250,000 a year, the concrete that we would need and the other things would actually completely exceed what we promised to do at the Paris Agreement alone by 2050. Now, because of what a huge thing it is to build that many, more importantly, when we can argue about the money, we don't have that many builders left, or skilled people in various trades. They're left to do it. We can't actually build this fast. We are going to have to build because we're getting old. So we need more property without stairs. But the great thing is you build that and folk like us move out of our family houses earlier into a nice apartment nearby, and that frees it up. The majority of the housing situation can be solved with what we've already got, but we have to have rent controls. You can call them rent regulation if people get a bit soft, it's the same thing. And you have to encourage people who've made the mistake of ending up being a landlord to get rid of that apartment or house faster. Because once you bring the controls in, suddenly it's no longer an asset because you're not allowed to milk people so that you can go on your holidays in old age. When people say, it is my retirement pension, I depend on it, I must be allowed to be a landlord, it is only 2 or 3% of the population, and they are almost all way up in the top 10%. Do not feel sad for private landlords, ever.
Thank you, Danny, and I think, John, the point you made on the chilling effect on peaceful protesters at the moment is something which we're all incredibly aware of and need to be. And Dave, your point on TCs is Trades Council is very well made, very proud in our region. I think we've got over half the trades councils in the country, but recently new trades councils in North West Essex, which is Saffron Walden, Bexhill and Battle. We're helping to get new ones set up again in the Isle of Wight and in South East Kent. So areas which need them, but we're seeing more people coming into the trades council movement, and you're quite right, they do need more support from us at the TUC. Right, this is going to be the last round of questions. So we're going to take 4. Megan, you've got the colleague there next to you, Ben over here, Ben in the check shirt here. We'll actually go from check shirt right at the back, and then the check shirt here. If we've got time, we'll take that one last colleague. Yep. So I'll point them out. Go. Thanks.
So
If you could.
I want to try and go back to the question about rehumanising the discussion. Very often what happens when we're talking about poverty or any form of policy is it is about the numbers. Danny, this isn't an attack on things. It is about the numbers and it's about concepts which are economics necessary but not real life necessary. When we talk about children in poverty, we have to remember we are talking largely about women in poverty, because the vast majority of children in poverty are those who are in single parent households, who are normally female-headed households. So my question is, or maybe I should say my challenge, because it's not just for the panel, it's for everyone in this room, what is happening to not just women but all minoritized and marginalised groups at the moment is an absolute, it's not even a step back, it's a pushback on rights, liberties, the idea of dignity and the idea of humanity. So my question is, for any of those groups, for the people on the panel, what are you going to do? But for everyone in the room, what are we going to do? Because we can't let this carry on. We can't stay silent about violence against women and girls, particularly women from racial and minoritized groups and transgender women and sexual minorities. We can't carry on accepting the rising tide of hatred and racism and xenophobia. We can't keep going in this way. And when we have discussions that become about economic concepts rather than people's lives, I for one find it really difficult.
Thank you, Megan. To stop you having to run around, we'll take the 2 in the back row. So it's that colleague there, and then we've got one over here and one down here.
Very, very simple. How do we make this Labour government act like a Labour government?
Simple question, not a simple answer.
Good afternoon, thank you very much. I'd just like to draw attention to a little dispute that's going on in Gloucestershire at the moment with phlebotomists. It's actually got national coverage. I saw something in social media the other day. A mother was looking for holiday work for her 2 sons, a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old. They were looking for £12 an hour. The phlebotomists, even after the recent increase, are paid £12.36 an hour, which is 15p above the minimum wage. Not surprisingly, 36 out of the 37 phlebotomists in Gloucestershire, or in Gloucestershire Hospital Trust, are women. It's a discriminatory thing. The only other one is Sudanese, so it's racial and sex discrimination in that pay. It's been going on, they put in their claim over a year ago. They've had a dispute going on. They're now on all-out strike, and they're now coming into their 10th week of all-out strike. One of the phlebotomists is going to be interviewed on Cotswold Radio at 2 o'clock on Monday afternoon. I'd ask you, anyone who's free then, listen to that and give them your support.
Over there. Oh, that was going to be the last one, so stop you having to walk around, but yes. There, I mean, just one there at the back. Go ahead.
Okay. On the day when we're celebrating Levellers and see Green, I really would ask you to give serious consideration to supporting the Green Party, particularly now because Zach Romansky is standing to become leader. He is one of the few loud voices who gets it. He would fit in perfectly here. The Green Party leadership, the only party that I can see that are supporting trade union struggles, is prepared to be on picket line. The answer to the question about how do you make Labour move is you get rid of them. You outflank them to the left. And at the moment, I really do suggest you have a look at the Green Party. If you sign up now, you can join, you can back Zach, and he is utterly different from all the rest of the stuff we've got. So have a dig and have a look at that.
Thank you. And our last question. Well, it was for the lady over there, but go on, we'll take. No, you go, and then we'll take you, and then I'm going to ask for a panel to answer the questions and wrap up. So yeah, you go, and then the lady.
I've just turned 30, so I'd like to thank my comrades.
Oh, you can't join the Young Members Network now.
So one of the things that strikes me about the Levellers is that they weren't just political movements, but were also communities of faith as well, but radical communities of faith. So I'd like to ask our radical priest on the panel, what's happened to that radicalism? Because as a Christian, I feel like I don't see that in our faith communities today, and in fact, often see our faith communities being incredibly reactionary. So what's happened to that radicalism, and how can we galvanise that radicalism in our faith communities today?
Thank you. And my last intervention from the floor. Thanks, Megan.
When a government takes money from welfare, from poor people, from disabled people, when it takes it from overseas aid to the poorest countries and uses it to spend on weapons of war, then I think it's absolutely urgent that trade unions and communities start working together. In Didcot, where I live, when they had the first round of austerity, when they bailed out the bankers and they took away our children's centres, our youth hubs, we set up a group called Didcot Against Austerity, and we've been working with trade unions as well, because trade unions live in the communities. Communities belong to trade unions, and we should all be working together. So I am going to plug a national march. Sorry, Sarah. There's one on the 7th of June, People's Assembly in London. Please all come to that. We need to make it big. We need to make it huge.
Thank you. And I'm going to come back to the panel now. I'm going to ask you to come back on particular points, but also to say any last words you'd like to before we close.
Thank you. Thank you for the point. I'm cursed with this numbers thing. This is why I don't write notes, otherwise I'd be awful. You're right, the majority of single parents are living in poverty and their children, but the majority of children in poverty don't have a single parent. Both things can be true. More importantly and more human, and this was the 7 children book I wrote, which has one single parent amongst the 7 families. The stress of living in poverty makes you much more likely to become a single parent, because the arguments you will have with your partner as you try to budget is what splits people up. And that, and that then requires more housing. How do we deal with things? It's much more inefficient. The Green Party, and I'll come to the Labour Party. Adam Curtis used to do Century of Self. Do you remember these kind of series for the BBC? And he did one programme called 5 Drink Red Wine in Kettering, about Philip Gould and the use of focus groups by New Labour to try to find out what Middle England thought, how Middle England behave. They're still doing this, by the way, which is why you get some of the most crass and banal statements made. They've got a particularly weird focus group. The interesting thing about Kettering, which was used as the place where they filmed people banally drinking red wine and saying, well, can't politicians be a bit nicer, but we'd like a kind of Labour Conservative mix, is that Kettering, I think, was turned a Green Council at the last local elections. So things that you don't think are possible can happen. A boring part of Middle England can suddenly do something interesting. How to get the Labour Party back? Again, that. Do not think that the people currently at the top are all of it. The ones currently at the top are those who are most viciously working hard to get there and most hated what had been going on in the party before. Some of the people advising them, I'm shocked by, are some of the least able commentators I have seen in my life. And I knew some of them 20 years ago. And discovering that yet another one of them is advising Starmer, it's unbelievable. These are hundreds of MPs. Apart from one constituency, they represent all the poorest constituencies in England. At least half of them, I think, are bothered enough to talk to their constituents. Their average constituents are poorer than the average family in most of Eastern Europe. And they will be learning that for the first time in their lives since becoming a Member of Parliament in many cases. They will be learning because they don't tend to come from average backgrounds. They're not all parachuted in. Labour didn't expect to win so many seats. There are hundreds of people there who are not going to become financial consultants after the next election. But they need help, right? They need to not feel that their voice is alone. They need a change in the general atmosphere where we more publicly call things out and say it's not acceptable, to make it easier for Labour MPs to have a backbone. So it's not so unusual when they say this is intolerable, and make it easier for cabinet ministers to resign when they've had enough. That's how you begin to get a change. One thing the Parliamentary Labour Party did learn in the last few years is that it can attempt to get rid of a leader. It knows how to do that. It's tried it twice before. I am an eternal optimist about this. I think we need, obviously, to be normal and European and have PR at some point, but the route to getting that is probably going to require the Labour Party along the way until we can have a normal European politics where we would have two parties on the left, a slightly boring Social Democratic Party and a much more interesting Left Party, right? But to get to that, we have to go through the Labour Party at the moment, with some help from the Greens.
Sarah.
Thank you. I hadn't realised, shamefully, that the phlebotomists are still out on strike, so solidarity with them, and I'll send a message and make sure we send a message of solidarity to them as I'm travelling back up north later on. In terms of the People's Assembly, we are supporting it, and that I would see that the People's Assembly was one of those mass demos that we should be coming down to say that we want something different. How do we make the Labour government act like when we disaffiliated in 2021? We kind of hoped that others may follow. It didn't quite suit, but I do think, Danny made some great points, but we also need to smash the system. How does a single mum from Wakefield become an MP? I went on a course that was designed to kind of inspire people to become Labour MPs years ago. Paul was on, my son's 20 now, he was only like 5 or 6 at the time. And I was like, well, how do you go down to London and spend all week down in London when you've got a kid? And, we've got a nanny. Well, does that not kind of completely change your whole... It wasn't for me. So we need to smash that system, because otherwise working people are not going to become MPs, or not going to be able to become MPs, and that's the only way that we're going to change Westminster, is when people like us are in there, and we're not allowed to forget our roots. And in terms of rehumanising the discussion, so what we try and do in the Union is when we do a report, we tell people stories. The reason why I'm so passionate about our Right to Food campaign is because I've been there. I've been there as a child, I've been there as a mum, where there's just not enough food for the month. And we need to be talking about people's stories, because, we've been having a conversation with Stand Up to Racism about what we do around the attacks against migrant workers and refugees. And actually getting people talking about themselves. I'm an immigrant and I'm a food worker. And telling those humanising stories break through so much more than the far-right rhetoric in the news. So we are trying. We've not got that silver bullet, and I don't think there's one answer, but we do make sure in everything that we do that we talk about people's stories and not just the percentages around them. And we also did a thing in March, and we're going to be doing another one in October and November around championing women in our union. So every day in March, a different woman was championed for something different. We're going to do in October during Black History Month, something with our black members, and then in TUC's Young Workers Month in November, something for young workers. It's a bit more difficult to do in Pride Month because we know that all of our members have come out at work, so we're going to do something slightly different, but in the hopes that we get to a point where we've got a month full of members to be able to do something in Pride Month too. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple of responses. I did have one directly about what's happened to the churches and why aren't they radical enough. I think it was ever thus in some ways, especially with the Church of England. But there is a sense in which the churches, like any other organisations in decline, have become increasingly inward-looking. Totally fixated on, at the moment the Church of England is totally fixated on sex. What goes on, it's lost its sense of the radical nature of the gospel, that I said at the end of my little spiel. And if one thinks as well on what churches actually do, a lot of food banks, I don't know if it's a majority, but it's a very large number, are run out of church property and often organised by churchgoers. And you remember the phrase, tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime, but they've been very good at sort of redistribution, and they've been good at that sort of stuff, that idea of charity, giving to the poor, but they haven't thought much about the causes of that poverty. If the churches were to stand up and talk more about the causes of that poverty, then something could be done. There are still 26 bishops in the House of Lords. It may be scandalous that they're there, but while they're there, they have that opportunity to call those things out. And I think a return to that kind of thing seems to me to be absolutely crucial. And there was a lot of fuss recently about the election of the new Pope. And one of the great things about Pope Francis is he didn't mince his words, and he constantly went back to the notion of the church is the church for the poor. The Church of England, other churches in this country, need to remind themselves of that fact from the very beginning. We've got the opportunity of the new Archbishop of Canterbury. Possibly we might find somebody in that kind of mould. And one last thing, just coming out of all this, how precarious our rights are and how easy it is for them to be lost by stealth. If you look back over 40, 50 years, we've seen them gradually disappearing. We need to be on guard.
Thank you to all of the panellists. So I've taken you slightly over time due to Paul Chair, but I wanted to try and get everyone in. So just 3 last things. 1, stay in touch. As Sarah said, Strike Map has details of lots of stuff going on. Up here, we've got little cards which have got QR code for our TUC regional bulletin, which has all the information around picket lines, action, events like today. And that comes out weekly. You can get that for phlebotomists. It's a trust by trust action. So some have won. There's been a really significant victory. Some, as you say, like the Gloucester ones, are still on strike. We've got lots of information about that. So do stay in touch. Take these cards. Look at Strike Map. Talk to each other. Thank you to everyone who's come today, everyone who's organised today. So Oxfordshire Trades Council, Megan and others. Brilliant this keeps going. And on the last point on that, it does take a little bit of money to hire a hall, help make sure we've got the kit for the bands, etc. So there is a bucket collection here and at the back. So please donate as you leave. Also, if your union branches or trades councils haven't donated already, you can do that online. A number of unions, RMT and others, have made donations to the funds. So please, if you can make a donation, we know everyone can't, do so on your way out. If your branches, trades councils can make a donation, do so online afterwards. Thank you very much, everybody.